Hello, everyone. It looks like we have reached quite a few people, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our first workshop in a series of 4, in a series called Broadening Our Ideas of Climate Justice. And this particular workshop topic is sacrifice zones in the era of electrification. This whole series is being put together by the Stop the Money Pipeline JEDI team. That stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And my name is Lee Evans. That's me on the slide. And also on this small team for this particular workshop is Arunima Sen, also goes by Rooney of Earth Guardians, Emily Park of 350 Wisconsin, and I am from This Is What We Did. And for this workshop, we're very excited to have this conversation about this topic and to have the wonderful panelists, the panel that we put together to discuss this topic. And I also just want to set the stage that we are all learning about this topic together, and we may not have answers to all of your questions, but we are committed to learning and finding them out together. So for this next slide, Emily, if you could. I am going to hand this off to Alec. Go ahead, Alec.
Oh, thank you, Lee, and just want to echo your very warm welcome to everyone on the call. My name's Alec Connon. I use he, him pronouns, and I live and work on Duwamish land, which includes the city of Seattle, where I live. And I'm the Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition co-director and one member of the Stop the Money Pipeline Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team. And I just want to provide a little bit of kind of high-level overview of the whole workshop series. So the what we call the STOMP JEDI team. STOMP being Stop the Money Pipeline, JEDI being JEDI Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, is made up of 10 people from 9 different organizations. Both myself and Stop the Money Pipeline's other co-director, Jackie Fielder, serve on the JEDI team, along with 8 other people from 8 coalition partners. And together, we're coming together to put on this 4-part workshop series that we're calling Broadening Our Ideas of Climate Justice. And we're really excited to put this on because we know that in life, transition is inevitable. And in climate work, a transition of some sort is inevitable, but we know that justice is not inevitable. And therefore, if we do not put justice front and center of our work, it can often get overlooked, or it can get not get the attention and focus that it absolutely deserves. And so we're excited to put on this 4-part workshop series, the first of which is tonight's workshop. And then in our next workshop, which is going to be September 12th, we're partnering with migrant justice organizations, and it's going to be a little bit more of a hands-on training. We'll not be in a webinar format, we'll be in a Zoom call format, we'll be doing breakout groups and pair shares and collaborative work, and we'll be really exploring how to climate organizers and climate activists talk about, tell stories about, and show up for migrant justice struggles in a way that amplifies and uplifts migrant justice struggles and doesn't inadvertently undermine them. As a number of climate organizers have had feedback, we sometimes inadvertently do. That workshop's going to be led by migrant justice organizations, and it'll be called Dangerous Narratives. And in the second 2 workshops, which are October 10th and November 14th, we're going to do a deep dive into the intersections between climate justice and the prison industrial complex, and the intersections between the labor movement and the climate movement. The way that we're organizing these is that 2 or 3 members of the JEDI team are responsible for each workshop. And I'm really grateful to Emily, Arunima, and Lee for leading this workshop, and super excited to just participate and listen and learn with all of you, and really grateful to our panelists for joining us. But with that, just want to really issue a very warm welcome to everyone to the first of this 4-part workshop series. Hopefully you'll join us for the other workshops. and I'll pass it back to Lee. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you, Alec. Next slide, please, Emily. So we'd like to open this workshop with a land acknowledgement to acknowledge that we all reside on stolen and unceded lands of Indigenous peoples. And I'm residing on the land stewarded by many tribes who for thousands of years made their homes along the Columbia River in so-called Portland, Oregon. And these tribes include the Cowlitz, Clackamas, Multnomah, Wasco, Katlamet, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and many others. We ask that you all take a moment, if you don't already know this information about the land that you're on, to look it up using a tool that Rooney is going to put in the chat. It's native-land.ca. And once you know, please go ahead and share that information in the chat with everyone. You can also feel free to share the organization that you work or volunteer with if you like. So we'll give you all a moment to do that. And you'll notice that this tool also encourages you to verify the information that it presents. So we encourage you to do further research on your own time and to continue your own learning. And we also acknowledge that the genocide and displacement and racism and violence against Indigenous people that has been ongoing for hundreds of years continues to this day, and that true justice, including climate justice, centers their stories, knowledge, and agency. So I'm going to take a look at it looks like I cannot see folks sharing in the chat. So maybe Rooney, you can look into that. And you can feel free to, if we're able to enable the chat, you can feel free to try to put that in, but we're just going to continue on here. So Emily, next slide, please. So this is an overview of the panel and workshop event that we have for you today. We're going to go over some logistics, talk a little bit about why we're here, some background information on the topic, do some brief introductions by Emily, and then go into some more detailed introductions, giving the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And then we'll go into a moderated panel discussion, followed by a question and answer session, and then a brief close. Next slide, please, Emily. So it looks like hopefully the chat should be working now. If it's not, we'll continue trying to figure that out. But if we are able to enable it, please use it. Feel free to show appreciation by putting in some plus signs, but please keep commentary respectful and relevant to the conversation. The Q&A box I know is working because I see questions in there already. So thank you all for putting those in. So if you have a question throughout the panel, please feel free to enter some questions into that Q&A box and not into the chat. Closed captioning is available for anyone who needs it. You can click on the CC button in your Zoom toolbar. Sometimes it's hidden under More. Oh, and the chat should be working now. I'm seeing messages pop up. Wonderful. It's good to see all of you here. So in terms of the closed captioning, it might be hidden under the More button, which is 3 dots, and you can toggle that on and off to do show or hide subtitles. And don't worry, this is being recorded, so anyone who could not make it today will be receiving a link to this recording, and also it'll be sent to everyone here for your reference. And we will be following up within the next few days with some resources that we're going to be sharing, not necessarily in this workshop, but some further reading and also the recording. Next slide, please, Emily. So who is Stop the Money Pipeline, or STOMP for short? Stop the Money Pipeline is a coalition of over 200 organizations, which my organization, Emily's, Rooney's are all a part of. And we're working to stop the financial industry from financing the climate crisis, environmental racism, and violations of Indigenous rights. Next slide. So to set the stage for sacrifice zones and this topic of sacrifice zones in the era of electrification, we thought it was important to present some definitions. So there's this wonderful article, academic article, tracing the origin of the term and how it's evolved over time. And so it started out as a livestock and land management concept and then turned into a critical energy concept in the 1970s, which then evolved into an Indigenous political ecology concept in the 80s, and finally an environmental justice concept in the 90s and beyond. Next slide. From this same article, it gives us a little more information about that transition in the 90s into an environmental justice concept. So in conversation with Indigenous leaders at the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991, Robert Bullard, who is known as the father of the environmental justice movement, adapted the sacrifice area concept, which he eventually referred to as environmental sacrifice zones, to describe environmental disparities in places that disproportionately bear the burdens of pollution, chemical exposure, and toxic waste. And then we really wanted to give Robert Bullard's own words here on what sacrifice zones are. And this is from a review that he wrote on a book about sacrifice zones. And he says, sacrifice zones are often fence-line communities of low income and people of color, or hotspots of chemical pollution, where residents live immediately adjacent to heavily polluted industries or military bases. Quite often, this pattern of unequal protection constitutes environmental racism. Next slide, please, Emily. And this is from movement leader Hop Hopkins. It's a really powerful and concise quote about the relation of these concepts. And he says, you can't have climate change without sacrifice zones. And you can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people. And you can't have disposable people without racism. Thanks. Next slide, please. So, thinking about the interrelation between sacrifice zones, which we just went over, and the era of electrification and trying to transition into an electrified economy, there's this important concept of carbon essentialism, which is the urgent need to reduce carbon emissions on a rapid timeline in order to prevent the worst effects of climate chaos, which is something I think all of us on this call are familiar with this idea. And this becomes problematic with a myopic focus when we're not taking into consideration the impacts of this idea and when it's used as a justification for allowing harm to marginalized communities. Next slide. So this push for rapid electrification through the lens of this term carbon essentialism poses justice issues with regard to the impacts of mining, battery production, solar and wind projects on marginalized and BIPOC communities. So sacrifice zones are a manifestation of systemic racism, as well as an extension of colonialism. Next slide. Some specific issues with regard to this topic. We don't have time to go over them all today. It's a complex, lots of different topics within this broader topic. But what we just went over is the urgency of the timeline, or this term carbon essentialism. Also, it's framed in this lens of geopolitical pressure. So it's framed as an issue of independence from China's rare earth minerals and Middle East oil. And that contributes to the urgency and what some people feel is a myopic focus on this. And then the perpetuation of social and financial inequality. So thinking about who immediately benefits from and owns these projects, right? Is it corporations? Is it the local community? Oftentimes it's the people who are being harmed and displaced have no say. And that, of course, leads us to displacement and the health impacts of mining. So thinking about all sorts of pollution and pollution in the water, soil, air, and the health and economic impacts of industrial wind and solar farms. and thinking about this extension of colonialism on a global scale. It's not only just smaller regions, but entire countries and entire continental regions that are being treated as sacrifice zones. For example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which supplies over half of the world's cobalt, which is a key mineral for electrification. And one of our further reading recommendations goes into a lot more detail about the DRC and it being treated as a sacrifice zone for the sake of cobalt mining. Thank you, Emily. I'm going to pass it off to you to move us into the panelist section.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Park. I use she, her pronouns. I am based on ancestral Ho-Chunk lands in the land known as Tejope, which means four lakes, also known as Madison, Wisconsin. So I'm with 350 Wisconsin as part of the Stomp Jedi team, and I'm really excited to be here to be the facilitator today for our fantastic panel. Unfortunately, we did have one panelist who had an emergency come up and won't be able to join us. So we will not be hearing from Katie LeBlanc, but I think the other three panelists will all have really exciting things to tell us. So today we'll be hearing from Chase Ironeyes, Doris Sam, and Professor Dana Nadine Scott. And I'm going to give each of them a chance to take 5 or 6 minutes to introduce themselves and tell us where they're from and what communities they represent. And then also, if each of the panelists could say, how are you seeing communities, whether that's your own or others, being sacrificed for the sake of electrification? And just a reminder, we do have the Q&A box. So if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, and then we will try to get to as many of them as we can later on. So we are going to start with Chase Ironeyes.
Hopefully, people can see me and hear me. Everything a go?
Yep.
Okay, yes. Let me just make sure I set a little timer, because if I don't, that could be disastrous. Anyway, Lila Daya Yahipilo, Lila Daya Wa'ualo, Chase Ironeyes, Hemielo. My name is Chase Ironeyes. I'm an attorney from the Ocheti Shakowee, we call it, but it's also known as the Sioux Nation. We have treaties with the United States. I'm not quite 100% sure about the Sioux Nation's legal interactions with the state of Canada, but we have tons of Ocheti people up there in what is now called Canada, and I'm an attorney that has worked for tribal governments, and some of you may have paid attention to, may not have, but have heard of the Stand with Standing Rock, or the No DAPL resistance. That was the first time I happened to be running for the United States Congress at that time, as one of the states of the Union, North Dakota. They only have one congressional rep, so like I was the democratically endorsed candidate for that state. But anyhow, I was actually running for Congress when I experienced firsthand what the corporate state means by sacrifice zone, or even what the institutions of law and order are designed to uphold, and are designed to declare certain people, certain others, to be more appropriately forced to live in sacrifice zones. And the mining law that it wasn't used in the case of Standing Rock, in the DAPL case, the Dakota Access Pipeline. And that case is still going on, but they used a different series of federal laws that allowed them to permit the entire project. I think it's about half a mile, quarter mile, in those small increments. And then, if you recall, President Obama, who was president then, in 2016, on December 24th, 2016, denied the easement. So these federal laws, which are designed to, sometimes they're designed to facilitate mining, and I'll get to that very quickly. But other federal laws like NEPA, like the National Historic Preservation Act, ARPA, the Archaeological Resource Protection Act, other legislative sources are designed, supposed to be designed not necessarily to stop corporate military extraction, or militarized extraction is what we experienced at Standing Rock there, but at least to mitigate against the wholesale poisoning of rivers, making rivers cancerous. And that's the first time that I really had to decide if I was going to let my children be forced to live in a sacrifice zone constructively by gunpoint, because the arms and institutions of the corporate military state were there and were being, we found out later, were being commandeered. I actually found out some through my trial, because I was charged with inciting a riot. I was facing 6 years in prison at the time. But through my discovery process, we try to do a lot to leverage my criminal trial to obtain a lot of the discovery, that so we could find out just to what depths the corporate state had infiltrated the supposedly objective arms and institutions of the state of law and order. But we found out that those things are very malleable, and they're subject to capture. And I fortunately didn't have to go to prison. I maintained my law license through that process. And let me very quickly transition. That fight is still going on. We still work with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe to make sure that the oil and the trespass that is represented by the Dakota Access Pipeline, that our nation is made whole for that. But our brothers and sisters, the Paiute and Shoshone people, are facing the same intrusion, the same illegal activity at Thacker Pass, or what they call Pihimaha. And I had the opportunity, the honor to go down there at the invite of Doris Sam, one of the founders of Ak Sam Camp. And we just call her the grandmother, Josephine, Grandma Josephine, and other grandmas and aunts, indigenous peoples, indigenous nations who are in their own country. They're in unceded territory. Unlike the Sioux Nation, they don't have a treaty. So the title to their land is something known as unceded title. And at their invite and at their authorization, a ceremonial camp was constructed on May 17th. And the reason for this camp was that 2 massacres had occurred there at this place, Pihimaha, or Thacker Pass. And in addition to that, Doris and her aunt Josephine are leaders of the Native American Church. And so a ceremonial camp was constructed in land that the federal government, that the United States considers it for illegal for us, for them, for indigenous peoples to be in that territory. And it's right within the mine site. So it created this conundrum. And we will hear more about that from Doris. I realize that my time is at about that time, and I don't want to intrude on other people's time, but it's my honor, it's my distinct honor to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chase. Yeah, so next we would love to hear from you, Doris.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Chase, I'll let you keep talking.
You got to take the conch. You got to take.
Good afternoon, everybody. Doris Samami and Newanani. Tamura te Paiute no Shoshone ne Ak Sam and Newagimat. My name is Doris Sam. I'm from the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone tribe, and I am an Ak Sam descendant. just as Chase was talking about, the first time I've heard of Thacker Pass is like about 3 years ago. We were we were doing like a little rally outside of a town named Orvada, which is just a little ways from Thacker Pass. We set up camp. We had a NAC ceremony, a Native American Indian Church ceremony at the first camp. Eventually BLM kicked us out, or they gave us we had to get everything out of there. There was no way for us to get up there because it snowed a lot. So it gave the BLM the opportunity to go in and find us, find two allies that were with us. And so there was really not much we can do. They closed up the gates, they locked them up, and my son and I, at the time he was 16, he's all like, Mom, he said, we can't let them keep us off of our own land. So I'm like, you're right, son. Well, let's take this gate down. So we gained access and we did a few ceremonies there ever since, but they came in and reinforced that gate. And so we continued droning. Everybody left. We continued droning the area. And we watched the progress that they were doing, and they were moving fast. So I was, I just kept on, getting a hold of Max Wilbert, and I kept telling him, hey, we need to do something. So eventually, on April 25th was when we did our first direct action. Myself and my uncle Dean Barlees, he's an elderly from Pyramid Lake. We stood on the front line and we stopped construction for a whole day. We stood in prayer. They worked around us and everything, and we stopped their excavators. So a couple weeks later, on May 11th, I was speaking with my elderly aunt Josephine. I told her that we should do something else. So with Chase's teepee that he brought down and the teepee poles that I had, we got together and we erected the teepee up on the water line up at Thacker Pass. Like Chase said, it is called Behemoth. And we did that to stop the water from going into the mine area. The reason why they call it Behemoth is because of the two massacres that happened there. One of them, which was undated, the men folks went out hunting while the Pit River people came in and massacred their family, cut their stomachs open, and strew their guts all over the sagebrush. So when the men folks got back, it gave it the rotten smell. And it was, the moon was out, so that's how it got its name, Behemoth. So anyways, on May 19th, on May 19th is when I was served with a TRO, a temporary restraining order from Lithium, Nevada's. I was standing on public road when they served this TRO. I was the only indigenous person. The rest were allies that were served with this TRO. A week later, I received through email, well, actually from a friend, one of the allies that Lithium Nevada had filed a slap lawsuit against myself and 7 other people. So they're denying me access to one of our sacred sites there where we go to pray. And the reason why we were defending this place is because of the dust that'll be blowing, once construction gets started, and while it is in place right now. So the wind, it blows towards the direction of our reservation, and they're going to be using sulfuric acid. It'll be getting hauled in from Winnemucca by semi trucks. So it's like I said, it's going to be blowing this way, and a lot of the elders are afraid that our future generations are going to be affected by breathing the sulfuric acid, and then also the water as well. We're already in drought here in Nevada, in the McDermott area or Nevada area. We're in drought. I was notified about like a week or a month and a half ago that Lithium Nevada had stopped work for 2 days because of them running out of water. So they're gonna have to eventually end up digging deeper into the wells to get more water. And they'll be using 6,000 acres. They're going to be destroying 6,000 acres. They're going to be using 11,300 gallons of diesel per day for trucks coming in. It'll be 1,700 million gallons of water per year for 40 years that they will be using. And that's a lot of water. We have ranchers on the east side of Thacker Pass and also on the west side of Thacker Pass. So, we're trying to protect the land, the air, and the water. Am I running out of time?
We can take a minute or so. I don't want to cut you off. Everything you've been saying has been really important.
Yeah. I should have set my timer like Chase. So, it means a lot to me, like I said, for the future generations. And I did mention the Jindalee mine as well. And they're going to be, it's a proposed Jindalee mine. They will also be digging for lithium. Beside the Jindalee mine will be it's called the Aurora mine, where they'll be mining uranium. The abandoned mine that's in between the Thacker Pass mine and the Jindalee mine is called the Cordero mine. And at this mine, they dug for mercury, and with their chemicals, they contaminated the waters with arsenic. So the water is unable to be drunk from the town of McDermott. And these are the things that we're trying to prevent. We don't want this to happen because our community is really small. We really have a small community, and a lot of the people aren't educated on what's gonna be going on, the effects that the mine will bring to the community and to the future generations.
Thank you so much, Doris. Looking forward to hearing more about all those fights in the coming questions. I guess now, Dana, love to hear from you.
Great, thank you. I will start my timer, take my cue from Chase. And really nice to be here, everyone. And I'm really glad to have had the invitation and to be able to learn from the struggles of communities elsewhere. My name is Dana Scott. As was said, I'm a settler. My ancestors come from Scotland and France. I grew up in the Ottawa Valley. which is Algonquin territory in Canada. And I currently live in Takaranto, territory that's been stewarded by the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat peoples, and is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. But I also want to acknowledge the people of Nishnantaga First Nation, which is in Treaty 9 in the very far boreal north of Ontario, who I have been honored to work alongside for many years in their struggle against mining in the so-called Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire is a mineral deposit that contains many of the metals that are important in making electric vehicle batteries. And so it's become kind of a bit of a front line in the struggle to protect that territory for Nishnantaga, because of the states, both the province and Canada have critical minerals strategies in place at the moment that involve onshoring for the electric vehicle battery supply chain. And what that means for us in Canada is that because the Inflation Reduction Act allows the large subsidies and rebates to be applied to vehicles constructed anywhere in North America, as well as to have the minerals sourced from North America, this has created major immediate pressure on the Ring of Fire region. And so Nishnantaga is a very small, remote Anishinaabe community that is accessible only by winter road or ice road or by air. And they are fighting to defend that territory in the peatlands from extractive infrastructure, including roads. And roads is the main struggle at the moment. And that is because to get those minerals out, heavy ore like nickel, they will need a road through a very long roadless territory of peatlands. And of course, this is really important because peatlands are also a massive carbon sink. And so disturbing the peatlands also has the potential to release a whole lot of carbon to the atmosphere and exacerbate climate change. Those effects, of course, will be felt most acutely by the people who live in the far north. But here Nishnantaga now has to face the fact that the state is pitching all of this extraction as being green, right? As being a climate mitigation measure. And so it's like an extra hurdle now for them to have to try to delegitimate that extraction that the government pitches as being so clean and modern and important to everyone's benefit and to everyone's ability to breathe cleaner air, etc. So I do not belong to this community, but I don't represent them either. But I work for a law school environmental clinic, Osgood's Environmental Justice and Sustainability Clinic. And the clinic has been working with Nishnantaga for about 7 years on various things like environmental assessments, regional assessments, ways of trying to stop these roads, litigation, etc. And so what else do I want to tell you about that? I mean, I think one of the main maybe interesting differences is that in the Ring of Fire, there has not been any mining to date. So we are talking about a very kind of like remote and not industrialized landscape. And so what's happened is that communities there, are suffering from the legacy of residential schools, of the ongoing cultural genocide, of major infrastructural deprivation. So Nishnantaga is 26 years boil water advisory, inadequate housing, etc. So, I have said before, to me, it looks like, the communities are basically being starved out such that they have no choice but to kind of capitulate to the mining. That's the extent of infrastructural deprivation there. And yet what has happened is the government, of course, has come in with a very aggressive tactic that has divided communities against each other. So some of them have now signed on to become proponents for the road projects and in the mining projects. So pitting very small communities that are neighbors and kin against each other in this moment, which has made everything even more difficult. Because what they need are roads, and that is an extractive infrastructure, Neshantika has kind of pitched their struggle as being one about protecting vital infrastructures, those kinds of infrastructures they need to survive. There's my timer. So the Attawapiskat River, for example, is what they really want to protect as their own vital infrastructure, and the sturgeon are really important to the community in Neshantika. So maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I really want to put forward these kind of the obligations in Anishinaabe law to protect that territory, to steward the river, are legal obligations, right? So if we want to really foreground, as other people have said, Indigenous self-determination in our struggle for climate justice, we have to treat those obligations as legal obligations on par with those of the settler state. And in fact, on that particular territory, of course, superseding any settler laws that might purport to apply there. So that's the approach that we have been taking in our partnership. And again, thanks so much. I'm glad to hear from everybody else.
Thank you so much, Dana. Yeah, it was really great to hear from each and every one of you about your own connections to these fights and to this topic. We have some questions. Some of them are specific to a couple of you, and some of them are a little bit more general. I'm hoping to start out with Chase and Doris. So whichever one of you wants to go first. Can you tell us a little bit more about what do you mean when you say something is a sacred site to your people, and what does that mean to you and your culture? And help us understand the importance of protecting these sites for becoming sacrifice stones. So Chase or Doris, whichever one of you wants to go first.
Yes, I'll take a quick. That is a great question. And like Vine Deloria Jr., for instance, and probably in addition to like many other scholars and people who tried to navigate the contours of colonial law, which descends from the doctrine of discovery and has no place for the concept of sacred sites, but rather make sacrosanct personal property rights. Property rights are what's sacred in Western capitalism, or just the Western linear grid void worldview that all of its institutions propagate. And for Indigenous nations, for instance, for me, the Black Hills of South Dakota, where Americans know about Mount Rushmore and maybe Crazy Horse Mountain, but those places are connected to my people's origin knowledge and knowledge systems. And it goes much deeper. There's probably 7 different sites in and around the Black Hills that we just cannot live without them. And we've been fighting for a long time. Spiritual teachers that I've had, medicine, this guy happens to be a man, like a medicine man, or spiritual interpreters, these people, shaman, they've been advocating to protect and defend what Americans call Devil's Tower. Bear Butte is another one of these sites. But these sites have their own cosmologic importance to our currently lived and expressed ceremonies and rituals and so forth. So that's, in short, that's what a site is. For some reason or another, it's significant. And Doris and them call it Pisa or Nipple Rock, but I will yield there and turn it over to Doris.
My digits are touching everything over here. I'm turning off my video. Yeah, when I talk about the sacred side of Nipple Rock, well, Sentinel Rock, it sits above where my great grandfather's family was massacred at. And it is a place where we go to pray, where we go to make offerings. We have a lot of artifacts there, so they mean a lot to us. It's very powerful. For me it is. It's a powerful place. I like to go there to pray for my ancestors. It was, it's kind of hard to be there at times, especially now when when all of this destruction is going on in the Jidali area. We have another sacred site, and it's called the Disaster Peak, and it is another place that is really another powerful place, another sacred site where a couple of the sun dancers in the past have gone to go on a vision quest. So we want to protect these places, and it is just places that mean a lot to us.
Thanks, Jason, Doris. I don't know if Dana, if you have anything to add from the communities you work with. No. So the next question I have is first for Dana, and then Jason, Doris, if you'll have a chance to weigh in as well. And this is very similar to a question that already came up in the Q&A from Susan. So how can electrification policies recognize and amplify the existing leadership, knowledge, and practices of frontline, Indigenous, and vulnerable communities in order to foster effective and equitable climate action? That's a very large question. I apologize.
That's okay. I think about these kinds of things. That's how nerdy I am. The very first and easiest thing is that everyone does not need to drive a private vehicle. So we're not going to just, we're not going to get out of the climate crisis by everyone gets to continue just driving around in private cars and we're just going to switch out the fuel. That's not going to work, right? So we need to focus more on transit and mobility. How do we achieve the kinds of mobility aims that people and communities have for themselves without just thinking, that electric vehicles are the answer to this? Then we can start putting our energy towards if we're going to use electric buses, for example, trains, those kinds of things, how do we build those batteries with the fewest minerals and metals possible? How are we going to do that mining in the most ethical way possible? And to me, the answer there always goes back to self-determination, right? So in Canada, of course, everyone is talking about land back. There's also folks talking about jurisdiction back, like the idea that we need to give self-governing power back to communities and restore and rebuild that the decision-making authority so that communities will make actually free, prior and informed decisions about what they want for their territories, right? And if the vision for future of territories includes some mining in order to get us out of the climate crisis, that would be one thing. But it certainly isn't for settler communities to decide that that's the priority and to impose it onto Indigenous territories. In my view, we can't ever get to a just transition if that's kind of like the basic framework that we have in mind. So I think I'm really inspired by you guys talking about this JEDI framework, putting the justice back into electrification, pushing against this like carbon tunnel vision is what I usually call it, but you guys called it carbon essentialism. It's the same thing, right? It's just thinking that, we just have to fix this one really small thing, greenhouse gas emissions, when in fact what we actually have to do is like tear down capitalism and overcome colonialism and those bigger, harder ways of truly transforming the economy, and not just like looking for the quickest, easiest fix. Anyway, as you can see, that's the kind of question I like to dive into. So yeah, thanks.
Chase or Doris, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Thank you for that. I agree. When I'm hearing Professor Dana talk, it reminds me of Thacker Pass. The Biden administration, through a loan program that I saw Matt Remley put in the chat, which kind of identifies where and that's thanks to Stomp and JEDI, other organizations that are helping gather up all that information, because one thing is the level of our consciousness just needs to expand and be more immediate. A sense of urgency is always really good for the moment that we're in. But the federal administration giving almost $1 billion to this project, to the Thacker Pass lithium mine, Lithium Nevada, and then General Motors, which created this mythology, was part of it. Ford, other auto manufacturers created this cultural identity almost, that I'm free if I can drive across the land in my sedan or whatever, that exists. And GM has agreed to buy all of the lithium that is going to come out of Thacker Pass lithium mine. So that is right on. That this is not, renewable is the solution. No, this is one mass consumption machine, just switching resources. That's all it is. That's all this particular thing is. We're not against solar, we're not against changing the way people move in mass transit. Like, we just want the smart people to do the smart things, but we have to keep fighting. And through my career, I've been able to the best of my ability, wield indigenous sovereignty. So for us, for indigenous people, and then even for conscious settler people who know and appreciate, legally appreciate and recognize what America and Canada are, the constructs, and where they derive their authorities from. And it's not a lot there. Like, if I'm a settler, I'm propping up my indigenous brothers, because that's where my legitimacy comes from, is entering those treaties with these indigenous peoples who knows how long we were here. But free, prior, and informed consent, having federal governments, Canada and the United States, be better, be different, just be more accountable, and not having capitalism is a problem. Extractive capital and all of the logic and institutions that come with that framework, it's for profit, for mass profit for a few, the shareholders, and everyone, the working class people, and then indigenous nations and other people who've been otherized are forced to live in the sacrifice zone. So just more conscious alliances, I think, and real appreciation of the ideas that we're in this together, that we're all in this together. Those of us who are speaking this language anyway, and trying to figure out, ways to save ourselves.
Thank you, Chase. So I've got some other questions that are a little bit more general, but I feel like after what everything has been said, I feel like we can end the webinar here, and everybody feels really excited to get working on this. But so one thing, we hear a lot about is how frontline communities are feeling the brunt of the climate crisis, floods, heat waves, etc. But then now we're also hearing about how frontline communities are also feeling the biggest impact from these projects that will help us towards electrification. So how should we be communicating about the tension between the urgent need to electrify quickly, but also the urgent need to protect communities? And any of you who wants to speak up, go ahead. Again, it's a large question.
I just got done talking, so I can't.
Go ahead if you have something that you want to say. I think we'd all be happy to listen to you talk as much.
Oh, yes. One other very interesting and sobering aspect is a concept that I've heard of called the true cost economy. And instead of incentivizing the extraction of resources, which we did, we incentivized the building of railroads, other national and international infrastructure. We incentivized fossil fuel development, and that's not to mention the multinational agricultural development. The things that our governments incentivize are never healthcare. It's never how can we slow this machine down? How can we tell the truth about the growth myth, about GDPs, the GDPs of these countries? We're not succeeding unless we're consuming. We're not considered to be uplifting our standard of living unless we are killing things. And that's the old adage about the forest has no value until you can cut it down and turn it into paper. Well, that is, a completely problematic way to view the world. The way that this system has operated on ourselves, on us as human beings, the way it's extracted the sacred way that we interdepend on the sacred elements, which are just commercial resources in this other world view. But the way that has happened could probably be diagnosed as some sociopathy, or be labeled more accurately a virus. It's literally given we as the human species a shelf life that probably you could just go back to the industrial age or whatever and look to where we're at right now and see that human beings are not the problem, but the way that we know ourselves and the way that we interpret and perceive our reality is off balance. And the Western institutions have a lot to do with that, but Western institutions could also have a lot to do with repairing that. And so I'll look, I started with true cost economy and I got way off on something else, but we have to do things. Indigenous peoples can't be the only frontliners. And we are a lot of times, because we have treaties that were like when they're trying to build a pipeline through, or whatever other infrastructure through, is electrification, whatever it is, we're like, hey man, we're like, we live here. Like, you're not supposed to be able to do that without our free, prior, and informed consent, or in America without the United States, the federal government, consulting with tribal nations according to other laws, NEPA, National Historic Preservation Act, and so forth. And so what was created at Standing Rock was something very special, something very powerful, something very sacred. And you saw 37 states in the United States come up with laws after that impose these draconian fines for people who were defending Mother Earth or defending their constitutional rights or treaty rights or whatever, and being present, peaceably assembling, speaking freely on what they declared to be critical national infrastructure. So there's a lot going on. Even think of what happened in America, January 6th, with Trump's, blood being spilled in the U.S. Capitol. Before that, it was very easy for private military contractors that were operating in Standing Rock to say, the natives are the terrorists. They're the religiously driven indigenous jihadists, which is what they labeled us. And the people who want to build a pipeline are the patriots. Well, that is not as easy to say anymore after January 6th. Things are in flux. they're changing, and we just have to leave room for the critical thinkers among all of our demographics and all of our countries to like do the right thing, because I know that we're capable of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that like it's our movement, right? Like it doesn't have to be a movement for net zero, or it doesn't have to just be post carbon. Like it can be post extractive. That's what we're trying to move to a different set of relations and a different logic for relating, right? With each other, with the world and nature, etc. So like we just need to fight for it now. And try to achieve that transition that we want, right?
Maurice, I want to give you a chance to weigh in here if you want. If you're talking, Maurice, you're on mute. Okay, I don't want to put anybody on the spot. We want to get to some audience questions, acknowledging that this is a really big topic and we're not going to be able to cover every type of sacrifice zone argument out there. We have touched a little bit on what a just electrification transition would look like. We've talked about not everybody needs to drive a car, etc. I just wondering if anybody has anything else they would like to add about what you think a just electrification transition would look like. Doris, do you have anything? I can't tell if you're still with us, if we've lost you, but love to hear from you if you have anything to share. Right, Dana, it looks like you took yourself off mute.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in some ways, I don't want to repeat myself, and I've been saying this, but one other way that I find useful in thinking about it sometimes is to really put forward like the basic environmental justice principle of asking the question that you guys put on the slide, which is like, who benefits and who pays the costs, right? Like every time we come forward with a new policy measure that we think might be, contributing to electrification and the transition, we need to just ask ourselves again those hard questions like who is going to benefit and who is going to pay the costs. And then it may be that same project is still a project we're going to find is useful to go forward, but we're going to work to change that calculus, right? To really try to have a better distribution of the benefits and to really think about how the costs are going to be taken on and who should have to share them and those kinds of questions.
I think that, yes, ideally, according to like my own complexes and biases, yeah, we don't want to do the same gross exploitative and extractive consumption way of life that has been the economic reality that is imposed on us right now, that the petrochemical world causes us to participate in, because it's the cheapest way for the working class to meet their needs is, to go to the dollar store or go to, to buy the cheapest things available. And the most exploited workers are those who are working for the least amount. Like I saw the next topic is migrant workers. Well, those migrant workers are indigenous people. Like for Americans to be calling these indigenous peoples who've been here for, untold millennia prior to the formation of the state of America is like more than offensive. it's like so like asinine. There's just something going on there that exhibits this this dissonance. But what bringing I guess theory into practice, electrification, yes, we know that's a reality. Like the things have changed, but we don't want a green colony. We don't want to live in a green colony. Like we have to change our myths. We have to change what we see as achievable goals. And like indigenous nations get this rep all the time that we're antithetical to progress, or that we don't want to see development happen. That's why they call these places undeveloped countries, to subliminally send a signal that extraction is development, gross domestic product is development, borrowing 10 billion from the IMF is development. It's not a form of slavery, it's democracy. We're letting you in here. This is what they're selling. And so we have to redefine what progress is, what civilization is, what poverty is, according to some other realistic version, because asking the system to slow itself down is very, very difficult. And this is why, indigenous people, this is why I end up with an inciting a riot charge. Like, I'm literally just speaking on Facebook and telling people, attorneys, media people, camera people, to come stand with us, right? In this peaceful stance, because we're using, in a very crafty way, civil resistance, which is much different than the strategies that my dad and my uncles and all of the armed resistors of the 70s in South Dakota on the Pine, for which Leonard Peltier is still in prison, and probably other political prisoners that I don't even really know of, but we're trying to use this civil resistance and this consciousness building to create those pockets of people who are willing to push, who sometimes are willing to stand in that place, that what is called the front line, that place where the militarized corporate state, there's a line there. And when you step up to it and you want to prevent whatever harm it's about to cause, or whatever resource it's about to extract, or whatever river it's about to poison, then you find out where that line is. And the more we have people willing to step up to that line, the more leadership is going to have to respond to it. So I'm not, I don't want to go to prison. I don't want to go to the front line all the time and be risking my freedom and my livelihood and whatever else. But I've studied this thing, and sometimes that has to happen. It's just like, it's good trouble. It's sometimes people have to step in them spaces. And anyhow, I'll say about that much.
Thank you. I think that was a kind of a really great lead into one of the questions from the audience. So Nico asked, is degrowth, particularly of global North communities, a concept that has some resonance with frontline communities and nations?
Wait, Dana, did you understand that? Degrowth? I didn't. Can you repeat that?
So is degrowth, particularly of global North communities, a concept that has some resonance with frontline communities and nations? Oh, and Lee put it in the chat. Thank you, Lee.
I'll be as quick as possible. Like, yes, absolutely yes. Telling the truth about our lifestyles and our standards of living. I think that especially indigenous communities, well, you know, we're like an X factor. Like we're already post-apocalyptic. I've heard people say that, you know, we live in such a survival mode and within a scarcity complex that when COVID came and things were shut down and there was no food in the grocery stores, we were just like, oh, okay, you know, that's a Tuesday for us. So like we're, yes, those of us in the indigenous community who are trying to build bridges with every other demographic that we are now one with, right? As in Turtle Island, in what is called Canada, in what is called America, we are trying to figure this out. And the growth myth and degrowth has to be coupled with right now, you see the green colony and it's doing bad things because of the state of technology. And I don't know, you know what I mean, why that is the state of the art or the state of the industry, but that has a lot to do with the way we do things right now is our state of technology. And cutting back on just the way things operate, like cattle, for instance. Right before I came on this panel, I was out on the Pine Ridge Reservation on my motorcycle looking for a place to hike, a jog, run, whatever. And every single place I go, there's cattle there. Like since they created these reservations, the cattle are more important than the people here. Like every creek everywhere I go, there's cattle there. You know what I mean? Like I can't get away from the settler colonizer aspect of my life. Like it's crazy. But like, look at how cattle are not the problem, just like human beings aren't the problem. But the way that these large capacity feedlots, what they're doing to cattle and how people are clear cutting, you know, rainforest to build more cattle supplies so that the human beings can consume the cattle, that is a problem. Same thing with the Monsantos of the world. The problems are so big that you just have to keep finding a fighting spirit. And yes, I dread every election cycle because, you know, we're going to hear some of the same things and we don't seem to be seeing the changes that we know we deserve and that we're willing to risk things for. But you have to find a way to survive and to know that you're doing the right thing and that you're putting yourself in those places where you can be effective in whatever way that means to you. You know, that we all come from very different places. And so whatever that means to you, wherever you're at, do what you can with that.
Thank you, Chase. One question, another from the audience that I would particularly like to hear from Doris on. So Tess asks, in what ways should we be aware of or thinking about how the fight against Thacker Pass and or mining in general are different from the pipeline fights many of us have had experience with over recent years? So I will paste that into the chat as well so that you can look at it. So
Okay, what was the question is in the chat, you said?
yeah, but I can read it again. So from Tess, in what ways should we be aware of or thinking about how the fight against Thacker Pass and or mining in general are different from the pipeline fights many of us have had experience with over recent years?
Gosh, I'd never experienced a pipeline fight, but you know, Thacker Pass, gosh, my mind just took off. I wasn't thinking. How to be aware of it. I mean, we can, you know, we have our website up so people can follow at oxfam.org. protect Acker Pass. You know, there's a lot of things out there that also my son's been doing the droning, like I was saying. I mean, it it's yeah, that one, oxamcamp.org. I was trying to think of it. Yeah, those are the websites that you can go on to learn more about the area.
I had one thought, Emily, that is, you know, there's been some interesting thinking about like, how do we fight different kinds of infrastructures or, you know, different kinds of extraction relative to whether it's like specific to a certain place, right? And the way minerals are, like if you have the mineral deposit in a place and those are the minerals they want, your fight is going to be slightly different than, for example, if you're trying to reroute a pipeline away from a particular place. Or and in both of those cases, though, I think what is we should try to keep in common is the idea that like our goal is not to just displace the extraction or its effects onto somewhere else down the line that, you know, can't be as well politically organized as us, or isn't, you know, we can't continue to kind of use privilege to kind of pass the extraction. That's just exacerbating the sacrifice zone dynamic, right? So we need, this is why I say like the benefits and the costs, we need like honest conversations about like, if we in the cities want to drive electric vehicles, what costs associated with that extraction of the minerals needed for those batteries are we willing to shoulder, right? Rather than think about displacing onto somewhere else. So that's been part of how I've thought about some kind of linear infrastructures like pipelines where the route can change versus mining, which kind of happens in a particular place. Although we still will see the same dynamic, right? Like in the Ring of Fire, we have to ask ourselves, if we organize to displace this mining from here, where are they going to go next to get that nickel, right? So our struggle has to be broader than just like not here. Although, of course, that's much easier for me to say I live in Toronto than it is for people in Nishnantika whose chief goal truly is protect the Ottawapiskat River. That's what they have the obligations to do. Those are the kind of laws they're trying to come into line with, right? So I think it is slightly a different struggle depending on how you're positioned in it.
Doris, do you have any updates? Like, you know, have you been, or not you, but do you have updates about the site? You know, Doris is prohibited from, and that's a problem according to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. We believe that there is a live, you know, a legal controversy whether or not somebody like Lithium Nevada can prevent an indigenous person, Paiute Shoshone person. But Doris, if you had any thoughts about like the lawsuit, I have not been able to keep up, you know, as much as I wanted to, but I look forward to tapping back in. It's really good to see you. And I heard Jimmy in the background, and I hope Grandma and everyone's doing all right. But yeah, if you just have any updates that you want to share or things that you might be looking forward to, I know that September 12th is coming up. Anything like that would be good.
Yeah, so Jimmy got the opportunity to go out there to drone, so you can follow his new drone updated drone footages on Pi Show Drones on YouTube. So it's more details. They're moving fast. On September 12th, we're planning to do a run to raise awareness, and everybody is doing good. Yes, Jimmy was in the background. He was cooking me dinner, asking me what I wanted for a side dish. Everybody else is doing good. Grandmas are doing good. We have been talking about trying to start up camp again. We're cleaning the old place up, the old homestead. That's where the run is gonna end. I did try to contact Grandma Josephine to have her here on the meeting with us today. But I think she ran away because I kind of mentioned it to her. She must have went and done her shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the lawsuit, the last I heard, I've been trying to keep up with that too. I don't know really what's going on, but Will told me that they're working on trying to get the lawsuit dismissed. So hopefully that'll go through. Hopefully that'll happen. So we can gain access back to Nipple Rock, at least place where we go and pray and things. That's all I know. Like I said, I've been, like asking what's going on, how far are we, when are we going to go to court? And I always just get told, sit back and just hold on.
I think they're just kicking the can down the road. You were supposed to have everyone that's involved. And yes, you can go to oxan.org for those who want to, and Protect That Past. Those are good people. Those are our allies. That's they're but they were supposed to have a hearing, Doris, other indigenous people, non-indigenous people who are all being lumped together in a suit. June 2nd, they were supposed to have a hearing, and it kept, I got tied up with ceremony back home. That's why I left the McDermott area where Doris is at. That's why it's cool. It's really good to see you guys. Maybe we should just Zoom more often. but which to me is a strategy, just like what's going on at Standing Rock. They just prolong it, and then business extraction is being done. Rights are being violated. That's what it feels like. That's what's happening at Standing Rock. The same thing. They're supposed to have issued their draft EIS, and they just keep stalling.
I feel like I personally have about 800 more questions for everybody here, but I feel like we should be respectful of people's time. We are running out of time. I do want to remind everybody that we will be following up in a little while with the resources shared here in the chat about ways that you can support some of the folks that were featured here tonight. And then I am going to pass it over back to Lee to wrap us up. But thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you to Doris and Chase and Dana. This was a really incredible conversation that I'm so grateful to have been a part of. And we will be including the chat and sending that out to you. There's a lot of great action items that were mentioned already by the panelists and also in the chat. And we will be highlighting some of those in the resources that go out to you. So just a really heartfelt thanks to everyone for being here today, and specifically for the panelists to share all of this amazing knowledge with us. Thank you so much. And next slide, Emily. Yes, please send all of the love into the chat as much as you want. Please, please, please. So if you would like to join us for the next workshop in the series, it is happening on September 12th. These workshops will all be happening on the, I believe, the second Tuesday of the month, maybe not. I don't have the calendar in my head, but on a Tuesday, September 12th, same time. And it's called Dangerous Narratives, Immigration Justice, and Climate Justice. And the brief description is it'll be an hour-and-a-half hands-on training for leaders and organizers in the climate movement of how to avoid making common mistakes when talking about immigration and the climate crisis. Partnering with migrant justice and immigration rights groups, this will be a participatory training in which we learn how to talk about immigration in a way that supports migrants and the fight for immigration justice. We'll participate in an exercise, do small group breakouts, and come away feeling more confident in our understanding of the intersections between the movements for climate justice and immigration rights. So please join us for that if you can. And that will also be recorded, I'm sure. We would love to hear feedback from you all. There's a link being dropped into the chat by Rooney right now. And that is to a pretty brief survey, just allowing you to share your thoughts with us. And also, we would love to hear from you if you have resources that you would like to share with everyone, if you think there's anything relevant that should go out to the whole group. So please fill that out, and you can open it up right now to remind yourself for later. Next slide, please, Emily. And these are some of the resources that we're going to be sending out to you. The first one is Hoodwinked in the Hothouse, Resist False Solutions to Climate Change. I think it's super relevant to what we've been talking about tonight. It goes into very broad, all different topics on climate justice and the different proposed solutions. And there are specific sort of chapters devoted to renewable energy and electrification. I highly recommend taking a look at this. And then we have number 2, contributed by one of our panelists, Dana. And it is an article in the McGill Law Journal called Sacrifice Zones in the Green Energy Economy Toward an Environmental Justice Framework. And also, Dana, if you have any other articles you would like us to include, please send them to us. And then third, we have Cobalt Red, which is a book by Siddharth Kara. And there is a New York Times book review that we will be including to give you a primer on that before you read the book, which is, it goes into the mining taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the human rights abuses that are going on, and how it is being, has been and is currently being turned into a sacrifice zone. And then we have fourth, what are sacrifice zones and why do some Americans live in them? This goes into more specifics about sacrifice zones here in this country. And then last, we have this really informative, very easy to use ProPublica map showing locations of cancer-causing industrial air pollution, which are not exclusive to electrification projects. It's all sorts of projects, but they do also include projects that are for the sake of electrification. So it's a really wonderful interactive map. You can type in your address even and see the sacrifice zones that are around you in your area. So we are right on time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists once again so much. Please send them all the love in the chat. We really appreciated you all being here with us today. I'm going to save the chat right now. Okay, chat is saved. And thank you. It is 5:30, so we will be closing up this webinar and sending you out the recording very soon. Thank you all and have a great night.
Thank you.